Okay, so as Gary said, Chris spent the past 2 years in what little free time he has talking to educators, talking to students about the state of the industry, about the tools that are out there, and about the approach you have to take when you want to break into the business. And I know that you've answered a lot of questions over those 2 years. I think probably none more so than, how do I get into the business? So why don't we take a step back from that and start with how you got in the business?
Okay. Unlike everyone sitting in this room, I guess you would call me an uneducated person. I started in the mailroom at Universal, 1969 I think it was, and moved into the film library, which was under the umbrella of the Editors Guild. Spent 5 years there, another 2.5 as an assistant, and then became an editor. In those days, there were some inherent things I was doing that I didn't know I was doing at the time, and one of them was working really hard and working kind of day and night to try to advance my cause once I became an assistant. And since I've been going out and kind of going to colleges and talking, and it's made me kind of reflect on my career and look at other people I know and work with and see how things have changed, especially in the last few years, and how competitive the business has become. And in some cases I kind of wondered why my career might have been more successful than some other friends of mine. And I think it's apparently because I've been willing to fall on my sword like anytime anyone asks me to do something. And I don't know if that desire to do that or the willingness to do that was out of insecurity or whatever the things were, but I kind of see how that is reflected in a larger way of what the business demands from us, and that in order to get ahead, and it's so incredibly competitive that it makes an enormous difference when we, how do I say this? Like in the job I'm working for right now on Magic City, Todd London's the supervising producer, he's the post producer. So when I go into a job, not only do I have to please the producer or director, whoever I'm working for, but if my job is to make Todd London's job easier too, to be low maintenance, to make him go, oh, I want this guy back because there was 0 problems when I worked with him. And it's part of this whole package that we present when we work. And when you see all the young people that are graduating from school and trying to find a place in this, I've been thinking a lot of how does one, there's so much competition, how does one distinguish oneself? There isn't enough room for everybody. And a lot of what we do or how our career path goes, there is luck. An agent I used to have said that he thought that our careers were made up of like 30% personality, 30% talent, and 30% luck, not necessarily in equal proportions. And the luck component you really can't quite figure out, but I've been thinking about that as well. But the idea that not only do we have to be good at our craft, but people get to choose us because they enjoy spending time with us too. So we have to be cooperative. We have to be pleasant. It sounds like trite things to say, but it's an incredibly important component, because whoever hires us as editors, they have to sit in a dark room with us, sometimes for weeks on end. And they want someone that they feel is a collaborator, someone who will be cooperative, someone who will be honest with them, someone who will be fun. There's so many different ways, and that whole element of what is one willing to do for a job. Before this afternoon when we were sitting up, Matt was asking me about the difference between when I was growing up as an assistant and what I see right now. When I was an assistant editor, I grew up in film, and normal rotation, would be 3 editors, 3 assistants per on a series. Excuse me. And the editor was the only one with a moviola. There would be like 1 moviola for maybe 6 or 7 assistants, and we'd pass that down around. So not only was it a privilege if the editor gave us a scene to cut, because that was the only version of the film, it was hard to get equipment to work on. So you come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, you stay late at night, and I did a whole bunch of that. And what I seem to be seeing now, which I find a little curious, is a lot of the assistants who have their own Avids, you know, and most shows do now, they have, you know, equipment for everybody. Don't, you know, all the dailies are right there in their project, and they don't spend time in every extra moment they have cutting, and that's the only way someone's going to move ahead, you know. It's really, you know, I don't know how to convey what one does when, you know, when someone out of college comes to LA, they're going to be a post PA if they're lucky. And so whatever skills they learned as far as editing goes are somewhat irrelevant, at least on day one. You know, if they know Media Composer inside and out, if, you know, it's great. If they're certified, probably even better. Because I found in my own experience, you know, when we have a post PA and you know they actually know something about what's going on, then it's, I know I'm more willing to invite them in and say, here, look at this. You know, if you want to cut on my system at night when I'm not here, go ahead. And then there's reciprocity in that, because sometimes they'll say, well, here, I did this for you, or they cleaned something up for me, or in the case of one person I was thinking of when I was having to go to the editor's retreat and speak, I didn't know how to rip DVDs and to try to produce material to do it, so they did that for me at night after they were working. So how does one distinguish oneself in this very vast marketplace is really, really a hard card, you know, a hard thing to be very specific about, but I know it's about really being willing to show up and work hard and take and try to anticipate and not just do what you're told, try to do more than what you're told, and kind of like that. And that's kind of how my career went. I was an assistant editor for 2.5 years before I was moved up, and I never went back. You know, talent is one thing. You go, I don't know, you know, editing is so subjective. Who knows? You know, we're considered good if we work on good shows. If we don't work on good shows, nobody knows if we're good or not.
Well, that's something we talked about a little earlier, and I should point out that we would like this to be a little bit of an interactive experience. If you do have a question, just raise your hand. I'll catch my attention, and we'll make you part of the show, because it's more fun. You have a question? Well, that was fast. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
How important do you think a college degree is, really, like realistically?
Honestly, I've thought about that, and because I come from a position where I didn't have one, and I'm not sure if my bias is a fair bias. You know, my bias would say, you know, my basic thing, and I can only draw from personal experiences, if you have, and I would define taste as, let's say, as talent is good taste. You know, good taste is, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I like that compared to that, and then ultimately that can turn into talent, let's say. And you have tenacity. You know, because when the first scene I cut was like, you know, the editor gave me, it was my first day in the editing room, he gave me a scene that was, you know, 3 rolls about that big, so it was like 30 seconds of the scene. It took me a week to cut it. There was a splice on every single frame. I would get out of sync when I would do overlaps, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I'd have to take it apart. I put it all back into its original form, and I started over again. And so I mean, it's honestly true. You know, it was like and I didn't know what I was doing, but I would put something together and I go, I don't like that. So if you don't like it, then you have to change it. And then it either gets better or it gets worse. And the frightening part is sometimes my process today isn't that different. You know, because everything we work on, the dynamic is so different. I've had shows where they recast and so they reshot the exact same scene. Or there was negative damage. So you have the exact same people in the exact same scene, and you now have to cut it for a second time. And you go, no brainer, I'll just do it like I did the first time. It's a totally different scene. The energy's different, the rhythm's different, and you know, it's actually a handicap that you've already done it because you're trying to mimic what you did the first time, and you can't. So every scene you approach, you encounter a different rhythm dynamic. You know, is it tighter, is it looser? I don't know. I mean, there's so many times I've gone, you know, I don't know what's wrong with this, you know, the rhythm of it. So I make it tighter, and you just go, oh, well, that's clearly not right. And the next thing you do is you open it up and starts to build some beats and pauses in it, and you realize that's the way to go. And it's just the ability to kind of stick with it and trust your instincts. I know Matt and I were talking earlier, and I would say kind of metaphorically, I work with what would be like a compass or a GPS kind of like in my gut. And it doesn't necessarily know where I'm going, but it guides me as to what feels right and what feels wrong. And I've learned over time in my own experience that if I like it, then most of the people I work for like it too. You know, and I'm constantly referencing my taste against others' taste. I don't take it for granted that I think I know all the answers or anything like that. You know, it's like if you like something, you wait and see how did somebody else respond. There's actually a clip I'm going to show in a little while from the first episode of Mad Men I did, where we used this. You know, when you're working with a new person and you're talking about the business and a variety of things, trying to feel each other out, see where their taste comes in, what it is, you know, how they want to go with that, what shows they liked and didn't like, and trying to find a common ground of communication that you can work from. And what else?
That all sounds good to me. The one thing I wonder about when I listen to you talk is that, you know, educators, as they're putting together a curriculum.
I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry.
So it sounded like the answer.
Should I
was
be a
no.
politician?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't think there's a right answer.
I think if you go beyond the scope of editing, I was reading a book a while ago about a guy who was actually a climber, but he taught literature, and he wound up teaching like at Harvard or something. And he had quoted something which I was trying to find, and is of the people that had done graduate work in writing, how few of them actually get published, and how many go into teaching. And I would imagine, you know, in academia, those who want to be screenwriters, the amount of them that finish that curriculum and actually wind up making money at it is probably a small number. And I would imagine that's whatever that inherent gift is in talent is something that person possesses, and you guys as educators, you know, find it and nurture it and help it grow and thrive, so when they move out into the world, you know, they really can do something. But I wonder, and I know a lot of editors that I would say they edit because they kind of learned how to, but it's far more mechanical, and I don't think there's some kind of inner guiding thing. I know when I'm cutting a show where it's not very good, or I don't like it, or if there's something that feels I just don't engage with, I feel like I've lost my compass, and that I'm trying to cut it on intellect, but not because it feels right to me. So you're just trying to do the right things because you think you should, rather than because it feels right, because nothing you do actually feels right, because let's say in this case the show wouldn't be any good. That help?
I think that a degree could help someone develop his or her inner compass. Maybe, you know, like courses in, you know, the humanities, like history or psychology.
Absolutely.
Help, you know.
I think if you would say as an editor, I'm a filmmaker as being part of the filmmaking process. I think those of us that are the best students of human nature, and I don't mean in a overtly studied way, are the best filmmakers. That there is this sense of, when you look at when you watch a lot of different movies, and there's certain movies that really resonate some way, it's because the person who wrote or directed or performed it or whatever captured that essence of humanity that we all recognize. And I think that's, I don't know I don't know what that is. It seems to, inside myself, I know when it feels right, and when it feels false, it feels really false. And I'm always trying to avoid that false thing, and like even working on Lost, which is kind of a, okay, it's a fantasy show with a hyper reality, but the fundamental of the show was all human emotion, and it was driven by the characters. So all the other stuff was on top of it. And but if you do like a procedural, like in television, it's all driven by the plot, and the people are far less significant than the problem they're trying to solve. And just for me personally, it's amazing. It's far less interesting.
Well, you spend so much time in all these discussions we've had talking about things outside of the aesthetic of editing and the mechanics of editing, and that's really, when you're developing a curriculum, there's a lot of emphasis on the aesthetic and the tools themselves. But you're talking about things like diplomacy in the editing room, sort of these intangibles that you really don't get out of a book. How is an educator supposed to help instill those instincts, values, what have you, into the students before they release them into the real world?
Last fall, I was at Full Sail doing something like this with two of the re-recording mixers of Lost. No, I'm sorry, I didn't get to go with them, and that was a makeup test for me. I went by myself. And one of the Q&A at the end, a student got up and said, I'm editing this film, and it was obviously a student director, and he's asking me to do things I don't want to do, and I want to quit. And, you know, I kind of like inside, I just went, oh boy, you don't have a chance. You know, that kind of attitude, if that's truly his personality like that. And, you know, I took a deep breath and kind of went, how do I convey it? And the truth be known, as an editor, we serve at the pleasure of those we work for. If it's TV, it's the showrunners, the executive producers. If it's features, it's directors. And the amount of input or influence we have on the show can be all the way from, I don't think this is letting any cat out of the bag, that Michael Mann is a one-man show. So if you work for Michael Mann, you will pretty much be a set of hands. You will be nothing but a facilitator for him. And then the other end of the spectrum is you can be an equal partner, or even greater in some cases, you know, where people trust your instincts over theirs. And the spectrum is everything in between. So, you know, in the politics of the editing room, and maybe because I've observed other editors over my career, and a lot of people, you know, I could see them do this. A producer or director would say, well, why don't you do that? And they go, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. And, you know, more, I mean, I know you look surprised, but more so than you would think. And, well, first of all, you know, and I know producers when I've worked on shows that have other editors that get so married to their own work that anything they do, they can act, you know, when a producer makes a comment, they can feel the other person get tense and stiff, and they hate going and working with them because it's like they have to cajole them into doing their stuff because this other person isn't willing to just kind of sublimate all their own ego and stuff for that moment and do what's asked, you know, and just try it. You know, if I had a buck for every time somebody made a suggestion and the voice in my head went, what a stupid idea. and I didn't say that, and just with an open heart really tried to make the change, and it worked really great. You know, I would have more money than I have right now. I mean, it's really, as much experience as I have, and as many different kinds of shows as I've worked on, you'd be surprised how many times you don't know what's going to happen until you actually put two pieces together and see what happens. And many times unexpected things happen. Matching problems that you think are just insanely impossible are invisible. You know, performance things that, you know, you think you can't get around that you can get around. It's really the rhythm, the pace of the show, you know, it's like a magician in a way. You know, the story and what's happening here is the thing that we're making them watch, and the stuff here that might not match so well, they don't see what's going on with their hand, you know? It's, but the editing room politics is really, the woman I worked for before I became an editor had a little mantra, and hers was simply, as soon as you fall in love with your own work, you cease to be able to make it better. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I really, really do. That, you know, I don't think there's a scene I've ever done. I mean, many that I feel proud of and pleased with, but I bet today I could look at any one of those and have different opinions on what I should have done with it, you know. And most of the time, particularly in television, we never finish. We just run out of time. You know, you don't, and also in television, you don't have there's no luxury of the perspective of a little time between you finishing the work and then watching it again. You turn it around so fast, you don't have time to be reflective on it. Editing room politics is really, you know, wholeheartedly trying to, you know, to do what they're asking. You know, I never would ever say, I already tried that. And in many cases I have, and a lot of times, I mean, most of the time what I do, if I start doing something and then questioning whether I should do that, making a change, and then realize that's the wrong tree I'm barking up, I'll subclip that out and just keep it in the thing, and then go back and undo back to where I was and proceed on. Not for my own benefit, but somebody's going to come in and say, well, what about if this? And I go, well, I didn't kind of see that to fruition, but here's a version of that. And so I always try to do that. And when someone has a suggestion, I always try to, a lot of times what people ask you to do isn't really what they want you to do. And so it's hard to figure out what's the source of what's gnawing at them. Particularly, we'll get notes from like studio or network notes, and they're very, very rather dogmatic, and they say, do this, this, and this, and this, which on the surface, all of us on our end will go, well, that's just totally lame, It's stupid. But then if you back up a step or two and you go, well, why are they feeling this? Are they not getting what they should from the character? Is the story slowing down? Whatever those things might be, if you can understand what's motivating the note in the first place, then maybe there really is a way to address it. When I worked on Lost with Damon and Carlton, they were very much like that. And they would, probably unique to all of television, they didn't take the studio and the network's notes. We as editors took the notes. They would call us and we would listen to what they have to say. We would try to rebut whatever we could, and then we would pass it on to Damon Carlton. And a lot of times they go, no, no, no. But they would go, wait a second. So they didn't get that part, or so this is that, and they would then rethink it and try to figure out how to accommodate it. Because if somebody has a problem with something, it's probably legitimate. The solution to the problem may be the hard part.
You touched briefly on just trying things, and also still having to solve problems that come from the set. We were talking earlier about how surprising it is that the old cliche of we'll fix it in post is not only still true, but it seems to have gotten even greater. That maybe there's this comfort level people have in production that, okay, well, there's so much you can do in non-linear now. Let Chris worry about it. You actually have some examples that you brought with you of dealing with things on the set where you had limited coverage or performance that wasn't exactly what you needed. You want to show us how you dealt with those things?
We can show a couple of things like that. I want to talk about Mad Men for one moment, and some of the ways that no one will ever know we screwed with the film. It's a very rather static show. It's people would look at it and think it's really simply cut, and in many cases it is. Sometimes the simple decisions are the hardest ones. Another thing I had heard early on when I was an assistant or something is, like, when you're learning to be an editor, you learn where to cut. But when you start to get good, you learn when not to cut. And there's a lot of truth in that. And one of the things, and I can only do this with my hands as hand puppets because otherwise you won't make any sense. But Matt Weiner, who's the creator, executive producer of Mad Men, liked to see people finish talking on stage. And so if this is an on-stage person talking, everything's an over the shoulders, typically as this person is finishing, you'll see the head start to go back here, because the other person is anticipating the end of the line, and you start to see that. And traditionally, the only way we could ever deal with this was you either hear that other person start talking off stage and then cut on stage, or you cut to that person sooner and watch them react to the end of the other person's line. Well, neither one of those options was acceptable to Matt. So we started doing split screens. And so we would actually just split screen and change the back of the head of this person. So it was stable. And then the onstage person could finish talking, and then we could come around. And we started doing that, once we kind of went, oh, wait, we can do that. Then we started doing it a lot. And then, there's a pacing issue on Mad Men. It's not a fast-paced show, but you don't want it to be overly edited as well. So it needs to have this kind of quieter thing. And when you would have performances where, albeit the performance was really good, the space between the words was too long. So historically, if somebody takes too big a space, engraved invitation to cut somewhere else to take the space out. The only way we've ever been able to deal with it. I used to do it and be successful ever so occasionally with a jump cut if they were frozen in time still. But with with the new tools available in Media Composer, there's this one little tool called Fluid Morph, which essentially, if you make, like, if I just cut the pause out, and they were relatively close, you'd put a tiny dissolve on it, like maybe 4 to 6 frames, and Fluid Morph, so instead of it just fading to it, it would actually just kind of move a little bit with it, and probably, I don't know, 4 out of 10 times, it can be invisible. And so we started using that tool to alter, where we physically could actually alter the film that was given us in a way that's never happened before. I think the last episode I cut on Mad Men, or the second to last one, I had in a 45-minute show, I had 35 split screens and 38 fluid morphs. Yeah.
So this is when you weren't going to cut around, when the actor made a pause between his own lines or her own lines. Yes.
Right. Okay. There was even one instance in one of the last shows I did there where John Hamm, the lead character, was sitting here at a table and his wife is sitting here. It's a very emotional scene. And there was one place I really wanted to just see the two of them in the frame for an extended period of time. But John's pauses were too great in between what he was doing. So I did, in one 20-second piece, 3 or 4 fluid morphs, so his rhythm was more what I thought it should be, and then did a split screen and ran her real time on the other side of the table. And this is the kind of stuff no one, you're not looking for effects in Mad Men, you know. No one would ever in a million years know, but it's another way we finally have at our disposal to manipulate the film we're giving to try to achieve the goals we're trying to achieve. This first clip I'm going to show here was actually from the very first episode of Mad Men I ever cut. And, been sleeping too long. And let's see, it was, I don't know how many, just to make it easy on me, how many of you have followed the show at all? Okay, cool. This makes it easy. In the first, this was the second to the last show of the first season. And it was a flashback with Don Draper in Korea. Before Don Draper, he was Dick Whitman. And it had to do where there's an explosion, and he is put in the hospital, and his lieutenant is killed and charred beyond belief. And so the scene was, there was 2 scenes. First scene was the explosion, Don waking up, trying to figure what happens, or in this case, Dick, and he stumbles over to his charred lieutenant, and then decides to take his dog tags off and switch identities. That was shot late in the day. They just shot 2 cameras, a couple of takes. The dead body kind of looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, that every time he tried to move it, there was sticky, oozy stuff on him. And also, you didn't see the thought process on John's face. I mean, this is a fateful decision for him to switch his identity. And that really wasn't present. And then the next thing is he wakes up in the hospital. They think he's the other guy. They're going to pin a medal on him and then send him home. And when I showed it to Matt Weiner, that's pretty much the way it was. And we both knew it was a problem, but had no idea how to solve the problem. And what also had happened, when I first cut the scene in the hospital, there was a close-up of John Hamm, really close, waking up. And he was really spectacular. You could see everything in his eyes about what was going on. The waking up, trying to figure out where he was. When the other guys came in, the Colonel came in to pin the medal on him. Still trying to. He was disorientated, trying to put it together, and it was really great. But I cut it that way, and then went, well, that's not going to fly. They shot all this other coverage. I got to do that. So I cut the scene traditionally as well, and that's what I showed the director and then Matt for the first time. So anyway, try to make a longer story short. When I ran it with Matt after he saw it, I said, John's close-up was so good, I have a version where we don't even cut off of him. And he said, let's see it. I showed it to him, and he went, oh, it has to be like that. So that's the way it went. Then he's a smoker, so we went out to talk. And we didn't know each other. And a lot of times what happens when you don't know someone, you start talking about films you've seen and what you like and what you don't like. And kind of trying to just kind of it's a way of kind of feeling each other out, you know, what the values are. And he brought up, you know, the film Out of Sight, and, you know, with Clooney and J-Lo. And, you know, there's always the question of all that kind of cross-cutting in time of was it pre-planned or was it post-planned, you know? And so, you know, how did that work? And there was one scene in that show particularly that I think most people remember, which is the love scene, which is kind of intercut in a really pretty spectacular way. And we were talking, and I said, gee, too bad we don't have something like, and we both looked at each other and went, the hospital room. So what we wound up doing, and we didn't even talk about it anymore, is we knew that the hospital room would be then the foundation on which it would be a flashback to him taking the dog tags. And so, you know, a couple hours later, it was kind of done, and it never changed. But the real kind of interesting thing about it is we both were speaking the same cinematic vocabulary, and instantly we both went. We knew what the deal was, and there was no doubt that this is what we were doing. So I'll show you that now.
Can I ask you a question? So you were going to play it straight chronologically before then?
Yeah, that was the scripted chronology of it. So you know, I cannot be objective about it. Is it the best scene that ever came down the pike? Of course not. Was it a really reasonably good solution to our problem? Absolutely. You know, and yeah.
Let me ask you a different question. Did the director work for Mad Men again if you're having these kind of problems in the post?
Well, that director actually directed the pilot. And Matt, I don't know how to say, Matt likes to control everything. And so I think by the time we got to episode 12, he was kind of feeling that this director was kind of deliberately sabotaging his vision. But, you know, that director's also gone on to do, you know, like a half a dozen very famous pilots since then. So I think what we didn't get in the Korea flashback stuff was as much a product of circumstance and time, not directing ability. You know, it's day exterior, the sun's going down, there's not that many takes that you can do, you know? So, also, as far as editing room politics, be a little reluctant to throw anybody under the bus.
Well, I was curious.
So that was the way we solved our problem. I want to show this other one because it's so ridiculous. This other scene is a product of the exact same conversation. On a different show, it was a love scene. It was a Showtime movie I did many years before that. And it was a writer, producer, director I'd worked with who created the series China Beach in the early 90s. And we'd known each other for a long time and been friends. And he was leaving for Hawaii for a week. And there was this love scene that really missed the mark on such a spectacular level. And he thought it would work simply, and he just shot it as a oneer. So I'm going to see if I can kind of just show you. I should really freeze frame some of the component pieces. So there's a piece where they come into the door together, and then there's this kind of piece, let's say like here. So essentially you had this couple, and the camera just stayed back, and it slowly moved, and it went to her, and then it panned over to him, and then it panned back to her, and then it kind of, as they came together, it kind of came in really closer, and then they kissed. And I had maybe 3 takes of that. And it didn't work at all. And then he shot 2 or 3 takes of them literally kind of rolling in bed. And then one take of it's Dana Delaney, of one take of Dana kind of laying back on the pillow at the very end in kind of with a rapturous look on her face. And it really didn't hit the mark at all. And as he's leaving, he says, you know that scene in Out of Sight? You know, it really needs to be. And I'm going, John, they had dozens of pieces. I have 3 pieces. What, you know, how can I possibly? And he goes, no, I mean, you know, just figure it out, and he left. I mean, I've had that happen more than once where, you know, when you're really friendly with someone, they will, you know, it's a little bit of a cop-out on their part, but they're really just tossing the ball out. And I remember I came in the next day, and I was couldn't figure out, I didn't even know where to start with it. And then I didn't watch the movie, but I remember going, well, what's the movie about? What's the story about? And then I went, oh, it's about seduction. It's about, you know, like in a love scene, it's all the sexual tension happens before they touch. You know, that's what happened in that scene particularly. You know, that's what it was about. And I was going, so how do I do that? And I was going, well, maybe if I dissolve some of these pieces together, I can protract it and make it longer. And if I can do that, maybe that'll do something. As I started playing with the dissolves, I went, these images kind of look kind of cool over each other. So then I started going, well, gee, what if I superimpose them over each other? So what I have is a thing where and once I started superimposing, then I realized once you're superimposing, you're totally screwed, and you have to then stay superimposed through the entire scene. And at that point, I wasn't very, I didn't know how to do this, so I only did it in 2 video layers, and I didn't, because I thought it was simpler to stay, you know, only in 2, where now I know if I'd gone up with each piece in multiple video layers, it would have been much easier to construct the scene. But when you have 2 video layers dissolving into each other, it turns into kind of a nightmare. And in those days, change a frame, render the whole thing over again, you know. So it took me a couple of days. So again, I don't think I could ever say that this is the best scene of any kind, but as an acceptable solution to a really kind of lousy problem, and the fact that it was, you know, born by the same discussion, it's kind of interesting.
Chris, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Please, everyone, a round of applause for Chris Nelson.
Thank you.